Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, in recent weeks, cracks within the once dominant Barisan Nasional coalition have widened. This is as top leaders in MCA are saying that the party is at a crossroads and must chart its own path after more than 2 years of drift since the last general election. MIC too appear increasingly disengaged. Now, as speculation swirls that both parties could abandon Barisan Nasional and even join the opposition coalition Perikatan Nasional, does the future of Barisan hang in the balance? And what does it mean for the Malaysian political landscape? What does this moment reveal about possible realignments in the landscape? So joining me now to discuss all of this further is James Chin, who is a professor of Asian Studies at University of Tasmania in Australia, and he's a long-time observer of Malaysian politics. James, welcome to the show. Good to have you in studio and not online. I want to talk to you about what's happening currently, particularly with the Barisan Nasional coalition. How would you characterize the state of Barisan Nasional as it is today? Is it a coalition in transition or is it a coalition in decline?
I think it's both. I think it's a coalition in decline and also a coalition in transition. But I think, to be fair to Barisan Nasional, to understand what is actually happening, you need to look at the whole Barisan Nasional from the time it was founded. So I think a very short history summary is appropriate. I think a lot of people do not realize that Barisan actually goes a lot earlier, back to pre-Independence Day. So it started off as Malaysian Alliance. So Tun Abdul Rahman brought MIC, MCA together, and these three became the founders of the Malaysian Alliance. Barisan Nasional actually only came in after the watershed event in 1969, and in 1974, Tun Razak decided to restructure the entire Malaysian politics, and Barisan Nasional only came in 1974.
Yeah. So it's 51 years old.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the sort of Barisan Nasional we see today is actually Tun Razak's version of the Malaysian Alliance. And the Barisan Nasional, people keep forgetting, was widely seen in the 80s and the 90s and even the 2000s as probably one of the world's most successful coalition in this region after the PAP. As you know, right, all the countries in the region actually had regime change. The only two countries that did not have regime change was the PAP and the Barisan Nasional in Malaysia. But of course, Malaysia, we had a regime change in 2018. But PAP now is the only party left. So basically, I think Barisan Nasional worked within that very, very specific time period in history from 1974 up to 2018. And it was widely seen as very successful because it was able to manage to do two things. One was that it was able to create a platform for all the communities in Malaysia. Remember, we had a very big problem with 69 racial rights. So it was able to create a platform where the minorities with the Malays can come together, create a coalition. But not only that, they were able to extend that model to East Malaysia as well. And people forget that when Barisan was formed, right, initially it was supposed to be all the parties. So even PAS and DAP were invited. So it's actually quite a fascinating story. So in terms of the decline, I would say that Barisan declined not because it wasn't working properly, but because basically a leadership issue. So everything sort of fell apart after the strong man left the scene, right? We talk about Tun Mahathir, he left the scene. And after that, you had people like, Razak, Najib came in. So Barisan was actually holding quite well until Razak came in and the 1MDB affair. So if that never happened, I would suspect a lot of people agree with me that today we'll be still seeing a Barisan government. So Barisan basically fell apart because of Mahathir left the scene, the strongman left the scene, and also the rise of Najib Razak and the 1MDB corruption case. If these two things did not happen, I would suspect Barisan will still be around.
Okay, well, let's look at the component parties of this coalition. UMNO is still going strong, but yet MCA and MIC, once were dominant representatives of their communities, have now been reduced to marginal players within this coalition. What happened there?
So I need to make a short correction. UMNO is actually not a strong party. If you look at the number of UMNO elected people, right, it has been dropping consistently in the last few general elections. So UMNO has not been a strong party. It's just the PR machine says that it's still a strong
Well,
party.
it survived. It survived the electoral cycle, even though it's in decline.
Yes.
It's done much better than its other component party.
Correct. If you compare it to the other component party, yes, it has done much better. But the decline UMNO actually started in 2008. So in 2008, people don't realize that UMNO have fallen from power without the MPs from Sabah and Sarawak, right? If you look at the numbers. So that's the reason why Najib, immediately when he got into power, right, what are the first things he did? He appointed the speakers and the deputy speakers from Sabah and Sarawak, and he made Malaysia Day a public holiday. Why did he do that in 2009? It's because he knew he needed the numbers. So UMNO actually, like I said, was in terminal decline from 2008 onwards. Now, what happened to the other two parties? Basically, in terms of MIC and MCA, they suffer from this very, very strong perception within their own community. So MCA made it very clear, we want to represent the Malaysian Chinese, and the MIC, we wanted to represent the Malaysian Indians. So in terms of the community, the Chinese and Indian communities, basically the argument was, we have backed MIC, MCA, we've given them seats in parliament, not 100% have to share with DAP, other opposition party, but we've always made sure that MIC, MCA had some seats in the federal government so that you can speak on behalf of the community. And we did that since 1974. But what happened is that the so-called political marginalization of the Chinese and Indians actually increased throughout the Barisan years. So basically by 2008, the Chinese decided to wash their hands and said that we're going to try for a different model. We're going to put all our eggs in one basket, and that is the DAP basket or the rocket basket. So there was a fundamental shift in Chinese thinking that, with so many years, we supported Barisan through MCA, it did not work. And in fact, politically, we were marginalized more and more. So we decided to go with DAP. So that's the reason why, if you ask most people today, they'll tell you that the DAP control about 95% of the Chinese votes. The Indian picture is a bit more complicated, but basically with the Indian picture is that the Indian community also gave up on the MIC. Part of the reason why MIC declined was because MIC, for the longest time, was under Samy Vellu. Right? And basically, Samy Vellu shaped the MIC into his own personal political platform. And when he stepped down, I think it was widely understood that the Indian community in Malaya were no longer willing to support the MIC anymore. So initially, the Indians decided to support the DAP, but in the last election, the bulk of the Indian support actually switched to PKR. Okay. The other big thing about the Indian community, which is not widely understood in Malaysia, is that the Indian community went through a tremendous change. During the industrialization phase in Malaysia, right, a lot of the Indians were displaced from the, from the plantation to the urban areas. And because they were not Bumiputera, they were not given enough support. So a lot of them, got involved in urban areas. They become part of the new urban slum. So that's the reason why in the last 10 years, right, people always talk about Indian youth, getting involved in gangsterism and what's up, because of the dislocation in the Indian community.
Okay.
So that's one thing.
So there's socioeconomic factors here at play as well.
So the other big thing that happened in the Indian community, which also had a big impact on the Indian community, is that if you look at the most successful segment of the Indian community, is actually the Sikhs in Malaysia, right? And if you look at the Sikhs in Malaysia, right, you will know that in the last 20 years, right, a lot of the young successful Sikhs has actually migrated overseas. If you look at 30 years ago, right, who are the most successful Sikhs? It's always the Sikhs produce a lot of doctors, medical doctors, all that sort of thing. If you go around today, they're still there, but they are not the younger one. These are the people who decide to stay back, but a lot of younger Sikhs have actually left Malaysia.
James, I mean, we've covered the history and we talked about the kind of the decline and the weaknesses of MCA, MIC. I do want to ask you, there are some people who argue that the diminished influence and the decline of MCA and MIC is part of a broader rejection of Malaysians against race-based politics. That this is really Malaysians saying enough of the identity politics. Is that how you see it?
No, Malaysians have not rejected race-based politics. In fact, race-based politics, the new term they use is identity politics, has actually strengthened. So if you look at PAS, right, PAS has actually strengthened both in 2022 and the 6 state elections. So PAS vote has actually gone out. And a lot of the new votes are actually young people, right? So people are playing this, not only the race thing, in terms of the Malay community, they play race and religion, which is the Islamic vote and the Malay vote. So in fact, identity politics has in some ways become stronger. People say that it's becoming weaker in the Chinese and Indian community. I can tell you, I don't believe that is happening. I believe in some ways it's also getting stronger in the Indian and the Chinese community. It's just that you don't see openly because they, what they call it, Malaysians, when we talk about identity politics, we concentrate too much on political Islam. Because of the Chinese and Indian side, right, there's less religious element to it. But it doesn't mean that, you know, the race identity, community identity
What
is
are we
less.
missing in the public discourse there?
We're not missing anything in the public discourse. You can see clearly, right, if you read the Chinese papers or you go and keep a track on the Chinese blog, right, they still keep talking about Chinese issue. If they keep talking about Chinese issue, it means they're not moving away from racial politics. So even today, right, they're still talking, if you talk to the Chinese community, those who are against rocket, right, what is the number one issue they use against rocket? They'll say that, okay, two things. Rocket is becoming more like MCA, right, MCA 2.0. Second thing they always attack the DAP is that you guys talk so much. One of the key promises you made was that if you get into the federal government, you will arrange for the recognition of UEEC, which is a Chinese identity issue. You know, so this thing is still play out in the community, and it's very, very, I would say, impossible to remove the racial elements, because the entire political structure of Malaysia, right, is based on race, religion, and royalty. But the royalty factor is also making a big comeback, and the royalty factor is making a big comeback for the very simple reason that the politicians have sort of lost the game.
Okay, but the current coalition, the unity government now, particularly DAP and PKR, the component parties in this unity government, they are multi-ethnic parties. Could it be argued that there is some possibility of change away from the traditional Barisan Nasional race-based coalition politics to a more multi-ethnic, that parties can champion community issues without being a singular homogenous race party?
You can do that, but to do that, you have to change the fundamental structure of Malaysian politics. So you can also make a strong argument, like I said, right, before 2018, right, people saw the Barisan Nasional as a very successful multiracial government, right? But it was only in the later part when Mahathir became the super strongman, then he put in policies that, you know, the joke during the later part of the Mahathir administration, the joke among people watching the government carefully was that they would say the key decisions of the Malaysian government was made at the Majlis Tertinggi UMNO meeting rather than the cabinet, which means the power was sucked out from the government and pushed to UMNO. So in terms of the current unity government, yes, it is possible they can pursue less race-based public policy. But the problem is that our entire political structure is based on this racial approach. So unless UMNO is willing to change the entire political structure, we are still going to have this approach. So for example, right, I'll give you a very simple example of why it's very difficult to change. I'm not saying it can't be changed, I'm just saying it's very difficult. So if tomorrow Anwar says that, you know, I'm going to have a color-blind approach to university intake, just as a hypothetical. He's saying that, you know, we think that, you know, everybody deserves education, want to raise human resources, you know, protect Malaysia's education integrity. We're just going to have meritocracy across the board, right? What's going to happen to UITM, IIUM,
Okay.
right? So these two, right, they are not part of IPDA. So how are you going to deal with that? And is he willing to confront all the people who are supporting UITM?
Okay. So institutionally, there are barriers.
Not only barriers, the whole structure since 1974 was built on this race politics.
Right. So talk to me about the current speculation that MCA, MIC are exploring options outside of Barisan Nasional. I mean, this is purely speculation by political pundits that they could possibly align with Perikatan Nasional. How credible do you think these realignment scenarios are?
These are not rumors, it's actually true. So this thing actually first came from MIC. MIC was the first one who were very unhappy. So the unhappiness is very simple. So after 2022, after the general elections, when Anwar put together this Pakatan-led unity government, basically he did a deal with UMNO. And the problem with UMNO is that when it comes to the spoils of government, UMNO did not include anybody from MIC and MCA. So they kept quiet because they wanted this government to, give them a bit of chance to settle down. People keep forgetting now, Anwar did not win the election. He was given a chance to form the government by the Agong, right? So people understood he was in a very precarious position, and therefore MIC and MCA said, we will step back, let this government stabilize first.
So stability was priority in the first 2 years.
But what happened was that they thought that once the government was stable a bit, then UMNO will champion their interests. And that was supposed to come in the 6 state elections.
Right.
But UMNO didn't do it. Zahid went out and collect seats left and right, but he only wanted UMNO candidates. He was not willing to push for MCA or MIC.
So is that the basis of the current internal discontent?
Yes. So it started from there. So MIC was the first one to say that, you asked us to stay back and support you guys, but we got nothing. Basically, we got nothing. Because previously, right, there were all sorts of reward system built into the Barisan model, which is if you don't get a cabinet post, right, then you get position in GLCs, council, all sorts of stuff. That's right. So they were totally wiped out from that. So now they're saying, this is 3 years down the road, right? Since we're getting nothing out of the system and we're not represented anywhere on the power structure, right? Then why are we hanging around? And this has been taken up by the MCA as well. Increasingly, the MCA is also very unhappy, saying the same thing. There's really no reason for us to hang around. And don't forget, this thing has popped up before. 2 years ago, MCA and MIC also threatened to pull out. So this is nothing new. This sort of discontent will come back again and again until Zahid can cut a deal with MIC and MCA, say that, even though you're not in government, these are the things that you will get.
Okay, so talk to me about whether you think MCA and MIC actually hold any meaningful electoral value to a coalition. I mean, have their influence waned so much that actually they're not real serious players when it comes to coalition building, be it current or in the future?
That's a $64,000 question. If you would ask me, my personal opinion is that they don't hold any more value. Okay. So whether they're there or not, right, it doesn't matter that much in terms of the outcome.
For Barisan Nasional, maybe, but for Perikatan Nasional?
No, because it doesn't matter whether it's Perikatan or Barisan, because in the next general election, it's widely understood, unlike the previous one, where BN was fighting Pakatan and Perikatan, right? Barisan definitely will go with PH this time. So people understand when you vote for Pakatan, you're voting for Barisan. When you're voting for Barisan, you're voting for Pakatan as well. So it really doesn't matter. Like I said, basically the Chinese community has decided to put all their eggs into the rocket basket. Okay. And they will stay there for at least 20 years.
But you said DAP might turn into MCA 2.0.
No, I said that is the accusation.
That's the accusation.
That's right.
Is there any real concern or merit to this accusation, any concern that it could happen or be true?
No, you have to understand, the accusation is that they turn the MCA 2.0. So people define MCA, right, as a party which can no longer exert Chinese interest in the Barisan government. Because like I said, Tun Mahathir became so strong, MCA was totally marginalized. So it is not a question of whether DAP can push for it. It is a question of how much concession Anwar, whoever Prime Minister, give to Chinese interests. So the way it works in a coalition government is that the DAP has a set, not demands, but these are our interests. So they got to negotiate their interests with PMS and say, are you willing to, concede this interest to us? So if DAP cannot get concessions for whoever the government is. So, for example, they are part of the government now, and the reason why this sort of accusation is taken very seriously by the Chinese community and Indian community is because they back it up by saying that if you cannot get any concessions, you are worse than MCA. Why? Because you are the largest party in government,
right?
And you still cannot push your interests. They hold the most seats. That's right.
So, just talk to me about MCA and where you see its future. If you, as you say, if DAP holds the majority of the Chinese votes and may do so for the foreseeable future, where does that leave MCA? Does MCA need some real internal transition and regrouping and redefining what they want to do, or is this should this decades-old party with all this rich history die a natural death?
No, MCA has to do deep self-reflection and ask themselves, how do we move forward? What is the proposition, the unique selling thing we're selling to the Chinese community?
Okay.
Right? A lot of people say that, oh, very simple, we made MCA into a multiracial party. I can tell you, if they do that, right, the party will die tomorrow. Because it's just a total rebranding. It's not going to work.
Okay.
The question is that, what can the MCA do? Now, I can tell you the MCA was very successful previously in terms of its service politics. MCA was famous for doing service.
Yes.
Now, the problem is that, how do you translate service politics like providing educational opportunity? Don't forget, Malaysia is the only country in this part of the world where a political party in government, because their supporters are blocked from government university, set up their own private universities. Right? MCA control 2 universities,
Yes.
both in KL and Kampar, and MIC control university in Kedah, plus the academy. So, you know, they've always been very good at service, but the problem is that the service politics they provide, for whatever reason, they will never be able to translate that service politics into vote.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, even though they were well known for the
But you
community
see,
service.
even though, like you said, they're well known for that, right? Especially if you're chased by Along, you don't go see UMNO, you go see MCA Service Centre. But the thing is, even though they're so well known, but MCA votes keep dropping down the last few state elections, so he has never been able to translate into votes.
Okay. Well, in the time we have left, let's look into your crystal ball,
Yes.
James,
I
and
got
look
no
at
crystal ball.
the future, forecasting the road to GE16. Do you think Barisan Nasional will still exist as a coalition in GE16?
Yes, Barisan Nasional will continue to exist as a coalition for many reasons. But my take is that no matter how difficult the conversation is between the leaders of MIC, MCA, and UMNO, right? Deep down inside, MCA and MIC cannot leave Barisan Nasional. Because even though they're weak now, right? If they leave Barisan Nasional, they'll become even weaker and even more irrelevant. They cannot actually survive outside the Barisan ecosystem.
Okay. Do you see any, more fragmentation or any new alliances forming, or is the status quo what we'll see moving forward? This is the political landscape, and it's all the same players running in the same.
Political landscape in Malaysia changed very quickly. So now Anwar has upper hand, not because he is doing all the right things. He's holding the upper hand because Bersatu is in disarray. Okay. Right, on the opposition side, they're in disarray, right? So on the other side, if they can get act together and mount a real challenge, then we will see a really interesting next general election. But like I said, we got 2 years down the road. So for me, right, I feel that what Anwar is doing, playing identity politics, right, he's in a very dangerous position. Because if you play identity politics, right, you're actually going to help PAS. PAS is the king of identity politics. And if you don't believe me, go to TikTok and look at all the influencers who are supporting PAS. They're very, very good at what they're doing on TikTok, and all of them play identity politics. My argument for the unity government is that if you want to win back the middle ground of Malaysia, middle Malaysia, the way is actually through the economy, not through identity politics. So when Anwar play identity politics, my own thoughts is that he's actually helping PAS indirectly, even though he doesn't realize it.
Okay. Is the non-Malay vote largely secure?
The non-Malay vote is secure for a reason which you might not think. People think that the non-Malay vote is secure because people support DAP and DAP support Anwar. That's not the reason. The real reason why the non-Malay vote is secured is because the Chinese have given up on the MCA, and also in terms of Anwar, right? The Chinese thinking is that if Anwar doesn't get in, then on the other side we will face PAS, which is impossible for us to live. Because a lot of it is about perception, right?
Yeah.
They're afraid that if PAS gets in, then we will face all the Islamic restrictions.
Right.
Whether true or not, it doesn't matter. But they're saying that we have a very clear thing. We have Madani on one side, supported by DAP, which is supposed to protect Chinese or non-Malay interests. On the other side, if PAS gets in, right, who's going to protect Chinese interests? Because on the other side, right, they don't have a Chinese party other than Gerakan, right? But everybody knows Gerakan has at most one seat, and the Gerakan leader is very weak.
So if MCA were to make the jump,
Yes.
would that make would it be a more
My
interesting
take-
proposition for
My take is that
non-Malay voters?
MCA will not leave the Barisan Nasional, and even in the worst case scenario, if MCA leave the coalition, right, they will not jump with Perikatan. Because if they join Perikatan, right, it means there's two Chinese party there. They'll even lose even more influence.
Cannibalize
Yes.
gerakan. Well, I mean, the landscape, as you say, is ever evolving and can change in a heartbeat. So thank you so much for giving us a sense of the pulse of the current situation. I appreciate your time, James. Thank you for your time. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching and good night.